tell us that to die is to be reincarnated in those we love while they're still alive.
Anderson Cooper. For decades, he's been the steady voice cutting through chaos. The man CNN trusted to stand in war zones and disaster zones and never flinch. But now, at 59 years old, that same unshakable anchor has just handed the world something far more personal than any headline he's ever delivered. This isn't a story about a glittering high society wedding. It's something quieter, stranger, and far more revealing. A confession about what's really been happening behind the camera, hidden from public view for years. Because after living through some of the darkest family tragedies imaginable, Anderson Cooper says he's finally found the one true love of his life. And it's not who you'd expect. Let's walk through exactly how he got here. Rewind to a little over a decade ago. Anderson had just turned 52, and he was standing at a crossroads, ready to close the book on years of solitude and start writing something entirely new. Then, in April of 2020, live on his own CNN broadcast, he dropped the news himself. He was about to become a father through surrogacy to his first son. He named the boy Wyatt Morgan Cooper, a name chosen deliberately, in honor of the father Anderson lost when he was just 10 years old. In a way, the child's arrival filled a hole that had been sitting empty in Anderson's heart for nearly half a century. 2 years later, that joy multiplied. In 2022, Anderson welcomed a second son, Sebastian Luke, and with him, the family finally felt whole. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody quite expected. Journalists digging into Anderson's home life noticed something unusual, someone who, by all official accounts, shouldn't still be in the picture. Anderson and his former partner, businessman Benjamin Maisani, had publicly ended their romantic relationship back in 2018. And yet, years later, Benjamin was still living under the same roof, still very much involved in raising both boys. This wasn't some vague, undefined arrangement either. It was formal, legal, deliberate. Benjamin went through the actual legal process to adopt both children, and today, both boys carry the hyphenated surname Maisani Cooper. Two men, no longer a couple in the romantic sense, bound together instead by something arguably stronger, a shared, legally recognized commitment to raising their sons together. It's a family structure that doesn't fit neatly into any traditional box, and that's exactly the point. Now fast forward to 2026. Anderson Cooper has just turned 59, watching his two sons grow a little more every single day, and that milestone birthday seems to have pushed him into some serious reflection. In a recent interview, he said something that instantly reshaped how the public understood his personal life. He put it plainly, he's done with dating. He's not looking for a romantic partner anymore. His life, he said, already feels complete. That single statement set off a wave of conversation because it answered a question people had been quietly asking for years. Where does Anderson Cooper's heart actually live now? And the answer, according to him, is simple. At 59, after everything he's been through, the great love of his life turned out to be his children. This unconventional household, 2 dads, 2 boys, no romance required, is the place where his heart has finally settled. But why does this matter so much to him? Why build a love insurance plan, as he calls it, with 2 fathers instead of one? To really understand that, you have to go back, way back to the losses that shaped him long before any of this. Anderson has been open about the fear that's haunted him since childhood, the fear of his children ever feeling as alone as he once did. He said it directly, if something ever happened to him, he wants to know his sons will still have another father there, ready to protect them. That's the real engine behind this whole arrangement. It's not a loophole in tradition. It's armor built from a childhood loss he never wants his own kids to experience. And that loss goes back much further than most people realize. To understand it, we need to rewind all the way to the beginning, to a birth that made headlines the moment it happened. On June 3, 1967, in New York City, a baby was born into a level of privilege most people only see in movies. That baby was Anderson Cooper, heir to a name soaked in American aristocracy. His mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, sole heir to a railroad and shipping fortune so vast it functioned almost like an uncrowned royal dynasty. Growing up meant mansions, wealth, and a media spotlight that never quite turned off. His father, on the other hand, came from a completely different world, Wyatt Emery Cooper, a gifted writer and screenwriter raised in a modest Mississippi household. Together, Anderson's parents built a childhood that blended old money privilege with genuine artistic and intellectual depth. Anderson's combination that, at least on the surface, that came next, looked untouchable, surrounded by love, wrapped in privilege, protected on every side. But underneath all that gold-plated security, fate was already circling. The first blow landed in January of 1978. Anderson had just turned 10 years old when his father, Wyatt Cooper, was rushed into emergency open-heart surgery in Manhattan. It was supposed to be routine, survivable, manageable. Instead, right there on the operating table, his father's heart gave out completely. He was only 51. Gone, just like that, no warning, no goodbye, no chance to prepare. For a 10-year-old, that kind of sudden, total loss doesn't just hurt. It rewires something inside you. And Anderson later admitted exactly that, saying his father's death effectively ended his childhood overnight, turning him into a kid who was permanently braced for the next disaster. After that, it was just Anderson, his grandmother, and his older brother Carter, 2 years his senior, trying to grow up in the long shadow of that loss. Life did move forward, though. By 1985, Anderson had earned his place at Yale, studying political science. Carter, meanwhile, had already graduated and stepped into a career as a book editor in New York. For a moment, things looked like they were finally leveling out. The future looked open again. Then came the summer of 1988, and everything Anderson thought he understood about safety collapsed a second time, far more violently than the first. On July 22, 1988, Carter Cooper, just 21 years old, was suddenly gripped by a severe, terrifying panic attack, one that medical reports would later link to a reaction from prescription medication. In the grip of that delirium, he ran out onto the 14th floor balcony of the family's Manhattan penthouse. His mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, chased after him in sheer panic and found him perched on the edge of the railing. She dropped to the floor, sobbing, begging him to climb back. And in front of her eyes, unable to stop it, she watched her son let go and fall. Anderson was at Yale when the news reached him, and it broke him completely. Losing a brother to something so sudden and so senseless was its own kind of devastation. Years later, writing a memoir alongside his mother, Anderson described that moment in words that still land like a gut punch. Carter's death, he wrote, was an explosion that shattered every part of his world. By the time he was 21, Anderson had already buried his father and his brother. That kind of loss doesn't just leave a scar, it carves out a permanent hollow space. And from that point on, Anderson lived as someone who understood, in a very real and personal way, just how fragile life could be, and just how deep loneliness could go. Rather than retreat into the family's enormous wealth for comfort, he did something almost nobody expected. He ran straight toward danger, toward the most volatile, unstable corners of the world. After graduating Yale in 1989, Anderson made a decision that stunned New York's elite circles. He publicly turned down any claim to the massive Vanderbilt trust funds. His reasoning was blunt. He believed that kind of inherited wealth would kill the very drive he needed to actually build a career, especially in journalism. So he applied to the big networks, ABC, NBC, hoping for a foothold. Every single one turned him down for lacking field experience. The only job he could land was a low-paying fact-checking gig at Channel 1 News. No travel, no field work, nothing close to what he actually wanted. But Anderson wasn't willing to sit still for that. So he did something almost unbelievable. Using a friend's computer, he mocked up a fake international press badge. He borrowed money to buy a second-hand high-8 camcorder. And armed with nothing but that forged badge and raw determination, he quit his job and flew, alone, straight into a war zone. In 1990, he slipped across the border into the remote mountains and jungles of Myanmar, embedding himself with student guerrilla fighters in the middle of active conflict. Anderson managed to sell his self-shot footage of a war most of the world almost wasn't watching. The network signed him on as an official international correspondent. By 1992, he was already pushing further into danger, covering the brutal famine and civil war tearing through Somalia. He watched death and starvation play out in the streets in front of him, capturing images that stopped people in their tracks back home. He kept putting himself directly in the line of fire, moving through active shelling, refusing any pullback toward a comfortable life in New York. From there, he threw himself into the Bosnian War, reporting straight out of the besieged city of Sarajevo, walking through Sniper Alley to capture what civilians there were actually living through. In the mid-1990s, he even spent nearly a year in Vietnam, teaching himself the language and studying how the country was rebuilding in the war's aftermath. From the outside, it looked like ambition, a young reporter clawing his way up. But decades later, Anderson admitted the real motive running underneath all of it was much darker. He said he kept walking into places filled with the dead because, inside, he already felt shattered. In his own words, the language of loss out there in the world matched exactly the language already screaming inside his head. War wasn't just his job. It was noise loud enough to drown out the grief he was still carrying over his father and his brother. Eventually, he stepped out of those war zones and into American living rooms as one of television's most recognizable faces. But that didn't mean the internal war ended. It just moved somewhere quieter, into a private battle to keep his true self hidden from the millions of people watching him every night. That next chapter began in 2001, when Anderson officially joined CNN as an international correspondent. His calm, sharp, fearless delivery quickly won him a loyal national audience. By 2003, CNN handed him something bigger, his own program, Anderson Cooper 360 Degrees, which fast became one of the most trusted destinations for political coverage in the country. But the moment that truly defined his career came in August 2005, when Hurricane Katrina tore through Louisiana. Reporting live from the flooded ruins of New Orleans, Anderson couldn't hide his frustration at how slowly federal relief was moving. In a rare, raw, unscripted moment on air, he said it plainly. Politicians were congratulating themselves on rescue efforts, while people were still dying right there in front of him. That empathy, forged from his own history of devastating loss, turned him into a voice for people the system had abandoned. After Katrina, his career skyrocketed. Emmy after Emmy followed, built on a reputation for courage and honesty that felt impossible to fake. But fame came with a price. For more than a decade, speculation about his private life and his sexuality followed him relentlessly. Tabloids picked apart every detail they could find about this charming, guarded bachelor. And through it all, Anderson chose silence. He never confirmed, never denied, never engaged, keeping that part of his life locked away for nearly 20 years. Later reporting revealed exactly why he guarded that secret so fiercely. Partly, it was about physical safety, reporting from parts of the Middle East where being openly gay could make him a target. But just as importantly, it was about journalistic principle. He believed his personal life had no business overshadowing the news he was covering. As he put it himself, the less a reporter reveals about who they are, the more the audience can focus on the actual story. Carrying that secret, under constant public scrutiny, for so many years took a real toll on him. Then in July 2012, that silence finally broke, and it opened up a new chapter of freedom, though not without its own heartbreak, because the moment he found love was also the moment he'd eventually have to say goodbye to the last member of his family. Anderson sent a personal email to his friend, editor Andrew Sullivan, asking him to publish it. In it, he confirmed simply and proudly that he was gay. It was a landmark moment. Anderson became the most prominent primetime news anchor in American television history to come out publicly, and the impact rippled far beyond the U.S. Alongside that announcement, details of his relationship began surfacing too. His partner at the time was businessman Benjamin Maisani, a well-known figure in Manhattan's entertainment and nightlife scene. The two had actually been quietly together since 2009, long before going public. For nearly a decade, they kept things low-key, avoiding the spotlight, building a steady life together in an old Manhattan townhouse. Benjamin became something like solid ground for Anderson after brutal days spent reporting the news. But relationships evolve, and by March 2018, reports of tension between them started making headlines. Rather than let rumors spiral, Anderson got ahead of it with a graceful joint statement. Their split, he said, had happened with total mutual respect. They'd grown apart romantically, but remained family and still loved each other deeply. Even after ending things romantically, they stayed close, continuing to support one another. Then came another devastating blow. In June 2019, Anderson's mother, the legendary Gloria Vanderbilt, passed away at 95 after battling illness. Her death left Anderson as the last surviving member of his immediate family, his father, mother, and brother all now gone. CNN cameras even captured the moment he returned alone to clear out her Manhattan apartment, surrounded by a lifetime of memories, feeling an overwhelming, suffocating solitude. Standing in that empty space, he realized there was no one left who shared those family memories with him. That crushing loneliness became the spark for something new, a podcast called All There Is, built around honest conversations about grief. It resonated with people everywhere. Anderson explained his own philosophy on loss during the show. The only way through pain, he said, is to actually sit with it and share it, rather than letting it quietly consume you from the inside. And that's really the through line of his entire story. Anderson Cooper's life proves that love doesn't have to follow any traditional blueprint. At 59, after surviving decade after decade of loss, grief, danger, and hidden truths, he's finally found the version of peace that fits him, built not around romance, but around his sons, and the unconventional family he built to make sure they never feel the loneliness he once did.